Good afternoon, New York City. I am here with Christopher Hitchens at his Washington, D.C. home. Christopher was to join us as a speaker at the Center for Inquiry's November conference, The Secular Society and Its Enemies, but alas for us, he has been whisked away last minute on assignment to South America. Christopher has graciously agreed to allow himself to be interviewed here at his Washington, D.C. home. Thank you for having us, Christopher.
Well, thank you for calling it gracious.
Thanks so much.
Made me feel like His Royal Highness.
The conference title is The Secular Society and Its Enemies. And a secular society, of course, is not one that's necessarily atheistic or non-theistic, but one that respects church-state separation, Enlightenment values, freedom of conscience, individual rights and liberties. What, to your mind, is the greatest threat to the secular society?
Well, first to say something about your definition, I think you're right in putting it that way, and in saying that we should insist on that as a minimum. This is the only country in the world that has ever written a constitution of this kind that says that religion can only be mentioned in the public sphere in conditions where it's being limited, its influence is being restrained. We don't mind, in other words, if people believe in, as Jefferson said, one God or 20 gods. It neither picks our pockets nor breaks our legs. We won't have them trying to teach it to our children. We won't have them trying to legislate their morality. And we don't have to. And some of your listeners or our audience will have heard me say this before, but I'm still quite proud of my new slogan, Mr. Jefferson, build up that wall. Who are the enemies of this? Well, I would say first and foremost, the forces of Islamic Jihad, who don't recognize the idea in their own societies and want to import the idea of a fully religious theocratic society to non-Muslim societies as well. I think that's quite obviously, backed as it is by force and by fanaticism, the greatest enemy that we face. But it's very noticeable that, for example, very few people mentioned this. Vladimir Putin, trying to recreate as he is traditional Russian chauvinism and great Russian xenophobia, Russian power politics in the Baltic and Caucasus states, is teaching the children nationalism in the schools of Russia with a black-draped clerical ally always at his side. Mm. When they try for the recrudescence of Russian nationalism, an old enemy of ours, because this is the group, remember, that originated the protocols of the Elders of Zion, among other works of superstition and barbarism. When they do this, there's always a priest in that classroom trying to say that the church and the state are one, to be a Russian is to be Orthodox. This is very dangerous, a lot of people haven't noticed it. It will become a problem for us too. Everyone knows already about the Messianic Jewish settlers on the West Bank, trying to bring on the Messiah in their own crazy way and bring in the roof, and of course the Christian friends they have who want to bring on Armageddon using the Jews as their wedge, supporting the Jews, as I once put it, as the rope supports the hanged man, trying to get the Jews to commit suicide to bring on Jesus. A pretty sight. And of course these same crazed Christians are a permanent nuisance to us in the United States, trying to get nonsense taught in schools, trying to ban stem cell research, trying to get the president to waste his time at the bedside, succeeding in getting the president to waste his time insulting the Shiloh family, a time of tragedy and deprivation. But I will have to say that I think this last group is the least menacing, the one we've probably most convincingly beaten.
And you're one of the four horsemen of the apocalypse, as we're now putting it, the new atheists.
Counter-apocalypse.
Counter-apocalypse. Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, and Daniel Dennett being the other three. There's been some criticism of the new atheists, some talk that perhaps they're going a bit too far and creating some resistance or antagonism from people who are in the middle of the road or undecided. In writing books like God Is Not Great, are you arguing to change minds, or are you perhaps preaching to the converted or rallying the troops?
No, I'm arguing for confrontation. By the way, before I go on, I should say that there are at least 6 horsemen, so we'll have to come up with a better expression, because any denomination of this that left out Ayaan Hirsi Ali would be, I think, distinctly incomplete. And I would add my friend Matthew Chapman, Darwin's great-great-grandson, who was a great star of the American Atheist International Convention, who's written a wonderful book called 40 Days and 40 Nights about the defeat of the creationists in the Dover, Pennsylvania school board trial. So that by way of a throat clearing. To me, the most annoying thing the religious do is demand respect for their opinions. I don't see why they should be allowed to do that, or why they feel that they are allowed to do so. I don't respect their opinions, and I don't feel I have to. I think their opinions are either contemptible, or laughable, or sinister. And there's no reason for me to muffle that view. And it doesn't seem to me that by expressing it in this way, I have narrowed the field of fire, or shrunk the space in which this discussion can take place. Because by saying what I think, and by eschewing any kind of hypocrisy, or falsehood, or spin doctor sort of presentation, I get invited all the time by religious groups. Come and say, all right then, tell us what you think, and we'll put up someone to debate you. They wouldn't do this if one was trying to ingratiate myself with them, or be unctuous. I think it's important to be honest, and to say that they've had it all their own way for far too long, and we have the obligation to bend the stick back in their direction.
So I hope everyone knows by now that Christopher Hitchens, one of his recent books is God Is Not Great, which has been a #1 New York Times bestseller. What was it that compelled you to write a book on this topic and at this particular time?
Well, I think I say in the preface, rather pompously perhaps, or rather grandly, that it's a book I've been writing all my life and intend to keep on writing. So it is, in a way, just another bulletin from the front line of the main cultural and intellectual war, which is roughly defined like this. Do you attribute your presence here on Earth, sir or ma'am, to the laws of biology or to a divine plan? I think I can tell a lot about someone from how they answer that question. And it's everything is involved in the discussion, everything that's interesting, from biology to physics to philosophy to morality. So we will always be having it, and it's a good thing too. This is just an installment, that's one thing. Why now? Well, I think I sensed a change in the zeitgeist, a willingness, especially in the United States, on the part of people, to resist religious bullying, to say they had enough of theocracy and the annoying noises that it gives off, whether it's the demolition of Iraqi society by the parties of God, or the threat that the mullahs in Iran will finally get, as well as a messianic ideology, apocalyptic weaponry, or this incessant attempt to stultify our children by teaching them nonsense in science classes in America. All of these things need to be resisted, and in a sense, whichever way you turn in the world, you come up against clerical intimidation or foolishness. So I thought, well, a book that thoroughly repudiated that might have a chance, and I was encouraged in this by some of the other horsemen, as I guess we still have to call them.
I guess horse people, perhaps?
Horse people, horse persons.
Very good. And I take it your book tour has taken you throughout the United States, into the Bible Belt specifically. What has the reaction been from the religious community?
Well, I asked my publishers at the very beginning. New York publishers have a tendency to send you from Manhattan to, say, Chicago, Seattle, down to San Francisco and Los Angeles, and then maybe back to Washington, Boston. And though I have done all or most of those stops on this tour, I did say I want us to start in the South. We started in Little Rock, Arkansas. We went to North Carolina, we went to Georgia, we went to Texas. This is just in the first week, when I have to say, by happy chance, I consider it to be a happy chance, Jerry Falwell departed this life, failing to be raptured bodily into the heavens. Instead, his huge carcass found slumped on the floor of his office in Virginia. And I was able to take the war to the enemy there and then as well in the South, and find, as I found towards the second half of your question, everywhere, that people in the South don't like it assumed that people like him speak for them. It's an insult, of course. And and I think, by the way, an insult we would do very well to avoid. I think quite a lot of people came to events of mine for no better reason sometimes than to demonstrate that they are not these redneck, ignoramus bigots and clowns, charlatans, of the kind represented by Falwell. When I said at one of these events in the South that if Jerry Falwell had been given an enema, he could have been buried in a matchbox. For a moment I thought I might have gone too far, and there was a silence, but it didn't last very long before it dissolved into quite a large roar of applause and some even laughter. And I thought, okay, let the networks go on believing and telling us that everyone down there is pious and idiotic, but it's not true, and we have an obligation above all to truth.
Your most recent book, The Portable Atheist, is a collection of essays, atheistic essays. It's just been published by Capital Press. And I'm wondering how you went about choosing the broad selection of essays in here, everything from Lucretius to Richard Dawkins, say. And if anything got edited out that you would like to have seen included.
Well, I wanted there to be as much poetry and literature as there could be. And so I start with Lucretius and Omar Khayyam. And I also include Omar Khayyam because I want to include as many critics of Islam and Judaism as of Christianity, which is a shortcoming of a lot of anthologies in English. They concentrate almost entirely on Christianity, and sometimes almost entirely on Catholicism. I wanted it to be, in that sense, ecumenical. And literary. I managed to get John Updike, for example, to give me a chapter of his book, Roger's Version, or not a chapter, but a chunk of a chapter, which puts a wonderful atheistic element in the mouth of one of his characters. Just to vary things a little, and to show that this is not just an argument about theism and deism, it's an argument about culture and literature and ideas. So if it has a distinction, I hope that would be the one people would notice. As to things I'm sorry not to have included, well, I wanted a piece of Ayn Rand, just to show that there is a conservative school, libertarian, if you like, school of atheism as well, an anti-religious feeling. And she wrote a terrific attack on the Pope, called Requiem for Man, in the 1960s. But her foundation, for some cultish reason, I don't know what it would have been, said no, we wouldn't be allowed to reproduce that. And I wanted my old friend, Dr. Israel Shahak, who was a tremendous Israeli human rights campaigner and humanist and great teacher of chemistry, among other things, to be reprinted in the book. But his ultra-left publishers, who alas have the copyright to much of this stuff in London, wouldn't allow me to do that either. This is a pity, but while I have people, I would urge them to look up anything written by Israel Shahak on primitive Judaism, and at least one essay by Ayn Rand, namely Requiem for Man.
Mother Teresa is a favorite topic of yours. You've written a pamphlet or a book called The Missionary Position about the sins of the Saint of Calcutta. And it seems like every time I hear you speak about Mother Teresa, you have a new colorful way of describing her. You've called her variously a wizened, shriveled old lady, a shriveled bat, and my personal favorite, a kleptomaniacal Albanian dwarf. We just learned recently that Mother Teresa, for a good number of years, some decades, harbored some grave, very serious doubts about the presence or perhaps even the existence of God. In your eyes, does that make her more or less contemptible?
First, the descriptions that you attribute to me. Of course, I laugh a bit, but there is, as you notice, something faintly puerile about them. It's just the temptation to ridicule her in the midst of this hysterical, 100% Niagara faithful publicity that she got for all those years proved to be too much for me. But you asked exactly the right question. When I read her letters and journals recently published about her crisis of faith, which I call it so advisedly, since it involved in her case a complete inability to hear or receive any of the messages that she hoped for as answer to her prayer. inability to notice anything of the real presence in the sacrament of the Mass. It's a very, very serious problem for a Catholic if they can't feel it. And in my judgment, her attempt to compensate for this lack and disappointment by hysterical overwork and ostentatious demonstrations of charity, the one thing the poor do not need, and hysterical dogmatic theological fundamentalism, as if to quell all doubt, as if to try and drown out all misgiving, and probably a good bout of depression to go with that. Made me feel, yes, just in the sense of being a fellow primate, fellow mammal of hers, a little more sympathetic, yes. I could more picture what she was going through. And maybe much more, if that was possible, contemptuous of her church, many of the senior male members of which, to whom she'd been writing these things, knew very well that what she needed was some kind of therapy, some kind of treatment, some kind of counselling at the very least, but who just told her that her suffering gave her a share in Calvary, and thus she should offer it up, and continued to exploit her as if she was a cheerful, loving old lady who was good propaganda for the church. This is disgusting. This is really awful. And none of the insults that I've heaped on her compare to what was merited by the cynical old frauds of the upper echelons of Roman Catholicism, who exploited her in this way and tried to exploit us as well.
And if the poor do not require charity, as you say, what do they require?
Well, it's been well known for many years, I mean, since the Victorian period, that the charity not only doesn't cure poverty, but is an insult to the poor. I never thought I'd ever have to have that argument again. But you meet liberals all the time who say, but she gave out alms in the streets. And well, we know that doesn't work. If that worked, it would have worked by now, cure poverty. Which actually doesn't, I'll repeat it, doesn't just not cure it, it's an insult to the poor to be made objects of charity. I must say, I'm astounded one has to restate any of this, but I'm glad you gave me the opportunity. As to what is the cure, we know what it is. There's only one treatment for poverty that works in any country, any time. And one name for it is the emancipation of women. If you will give the women of Bangladesh or Bolivia the freedom to get off the cycle of compulsory pregnancy, sometimes annual pregnancy, if you let them not just be childbearing machines, give them some control over their own fertility, and that in itself will raise the floor on which the village or community is established. Come back in 2 years after you've done that, things will already be improving. If you can throw in a few tools and a handful of seeds and maybe some microcredit, vast improvement right away. All the talents of women are released into society, and they have the chance to really pay attention to children instead of just being breeding machines. Mother Teresa, needless to add, spent her entire life campaigning against this solution, the only solution probably. Her life, to the extent that it was successful, hugely increased poverty. She praised it. She wasn't a friend of the poor, she was a friend of poverty. She was a friend of the rich, she was a friend of the Duvalier dictatorship, of Princess Diana, of various other idle and spoiled and corrupt elites. But she was a real friend of poverty. She said, consider it a gift from God. And she sure made certain that there would be lots more of it, because everywhere she set her face and her policy against the emancipation of women from the breeding machine subjection, which is the real cause of dirt, disease, filth, ignorance and poverty, in all the things on which religion breeds, by the way, to begin with. Well, you remember what she said when she got the Nobel Prize for peace, I might add, having never done or said anything in favour of peace. But you can't just go and get the prize, you have to make a speech before you pick up the check, which she spent on building convents, by the way. she is admitted, all the money building comments, not on medicine or food for the poor. She said at the presentation of the prize, she discovered what the greatest threat to world peace was. Do you know what it was? Abortion was the greatest threat to world peace. And so she considered contraception to be the moral equivalent of abortion, and repeatedly said so. She might as well have said contraception was the greatest threat to world peace. This is fanaticism. And it's fanaticism in the service of ignorance and superstition and backwardness and poverty. So her reputation as a friend of the poor is, I think, the single most inflated and bogus reputation of the last century. And I'm very, very proud to have had a small part in puncturing it, discouraging it. And it's a pleasure to find out that she didn't believe in God either. Gives us something in common.
Well, you are a newly minted United States citizen.
Yes.
So I'll congratulate you.
Thank you. Well, the honour is mine, but thank you all the same.
I wanted to ask you about a statement that Simon Blackburn, the philosopher, made to the British Humanist Association, I think it was. He was commenting on Voltaire, and in 1726 he was exiled from France to London, and he commented on, he was enchanted by the English freedom. And Blackburn said that he was lucky to be exiled in 1726 Britain, as opposed to Britain in the 21st century, and still much less than to be exiled to the United States today, where as a foreign national he would risk indefinite arbitrary detention, abrogation of habeas corpus, secret hearing without right of representation, and possibly the death penalty by majority vote of a secret military tribunal. So as a new U.S. citizen, what do you say to that? Has the United States lost its head?
Well, I am, and I was actually, while I was waiting to become a citizen, a named plaintiff in the suit brought by the American Civil Liberties Union against the Department of Justice and implicitly the National Security Agency on the single matter of warrantless wiretapping of Americans. We were found at one point to have standing to bring this, and I was certainly, if we had standing, I had enough standing as a permanent resident to join this suit and as a writer, which it's impressed me that in the United States I could both be applying for citizenship and suing the government at the same time on a matter of such importance. And on all of the things that you mentioned, and I'm a great admirer of Professor Blackburn, you can deduce from what I've just said what my misgivings are. But I insist that it be borne in mind that these exigencies, this whole debate, and all these measures has been forced upon us, this exigency, as I call it, by a theocratic attack on our civil society of unprecedented ferocity and cruelty. And I'm quite willing to discuss all these questions in a very critical manner, as long as it's not forgotten that is the case. And as long as it's not forgotten that it's a very high priority that those who have organized a theocratic attack on everything that makes our civilization possible be convincingly and utterly and ruthlessly defeated. And to me that remains a very high priority, and I'm not sure that I trust anyone who doesn't second me in that view.
Well, when this tape is going to be played in New York City, I will be in the audience, and I have a feeling the audience might tear me limb from limb if I don't ask you about Iraq, since I know that so many of our attendees would love to have questioned you about that during the question and answer session.
Of course.
So I can imagine them asking a question like the following. We know that Iraq had no weapons of mass destruction.
No, we don't.
Had no...
We don't know that.
And we know for certain that, say, a country like North Korea or Iran was on the path. So were we barking up the wrong tree?
No, the threat posed by Saddam Hussein's Iraq, both in the matter of weaponry, latent and actual, and its association with Islamic terrorism, was, in my opinion, understated by the administration. By the way, it's possible to understate something while exaggerating it. And I know there are enough people in this audience who will work out that that's true. It can be exaggerated, but it can still be understated. It's impossible to exaggerate the danger and the horror of Saddam Hussein's Iraq, and it's only changing the subject to say, well, there are other regimes that might be equally punishable. No other regime would put itself so far outside the law concerning genocide, terrorism, invasion, occupation of other countries, and breaches of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. If anyone wants to have a confrontation with North Korea or Iran or any other totalitarian or theocratic or expansionist system, they can certainly count on me to give them a sympathetic hearing. As long as I don't suspect them of intruding these cases in order to change the subject away from confrontation altogether.
And on the topic of genocide and suffering, one topic that often comes up in debate with theists versus atheists, are regimes such as Stalin's regime or Pol Pot. And the argument is made that if we're to blame Christianity, say, for the Inquisition and the Crusades, isn't it only fair that we blame atheism for the sins of atheist states?
When or once, that was a good whence, when or once it's pointed out to me that there was ever a government of an important society, or even an unimportant one, that adopted the teachings of Lucretius, Spinoza, Russell, Jefferson, Paine, Einstein, and then degenerated into barbarism and mass murder and torture and famine. Once that's been pointed out to me, that example, I will be interested in this argument. For now, I recognize it only as an argument one has to have with people who are digging themselves one more last ditch before they are really up against the wall. Of course we can have that argument if we want to. I can do it very shortly. Fascism, the original totalitarian movement of the 20th century, the one that coined the word totalitarian, is another name for the Catholic right wing. That's all it is. Slovakia, Croatia. I'm doing it from east to west now. Slovakia, Croatia, Spain. Well, no, that's exempting Hungary, Austria, Bavaria, Spain, Portugal. It is as much as to say we're talking about the activities of the Catholic right in southern and central and eastern Europe in the 1920s and 1930s. That's what it is. No one's ever been able to apologize enough in the Vatican since that time. So there's nothing secular about that. The German clone of fascism, the National Socialist clone, also draws very heavily on the Catholic right wing, especially in Austria and in Bavaria. Hitler never repudiates his Catholicism, never repudiates the prayers said on his birthday by the Catholic Church, praises Catholicism in Mein Kampf for its stand against the Jews, among other things, and against communism. But undoubtedly wanted, in the end, to replace it with some kind of pagan Norse cult, probably centered upon himself. Nothing secular about that. Right? To the question of Joseph Stalin, I can be fairly quick. Until 1917, the situation in Russia was as follows. Millions of Russians, for hundreds of years, have been told that the head of their state was a supernatural force. Not quite divine, but little more than human. The Tsar was the head of the church. He stood something above the common rung, the father of the people. More like a pope, something divinely ordained, if not divine. Well, if you were Joseph Stalin, trained in a seminary, I might add, and you wanted to be in the dictatorship business, which he did, you shouldn't be in that business if you can't recognize an opportunity like that. You've been gifted by religion a huge reservoir of credulity and servility. If you can't make use of that, you're sunk. So our enemies are credulity and servility. That's the point of our movement, if we call it a movement, it's the point of our existence, the point of our critique, is to be opposed to people who believe things on faith and who grovel and who thank divine leaders. Stalin was able to mount an inquisition, very famously. A heresy hunt, very famously. He was able to proclaim miracles, very famously. Lysenko's pseudobiology, producing 5 harvests a year or whatever it was. He was able to teach the children that they had him to thank for all blessings, and demonic enemies to blame for anything that went wrong. What is this but a replication of old Russian theocracy, which you can prove? By the way, the Orthodox Church never broke with Stalin. He always maintained an Orthodox Church because he knew he might need one. But you can see this mutation now, as I mentioned earlier, with the former KGB thug Vladimir Putin and his alliance with the Orthodox Church to try and recreate a great Russian chauvinist state, imposing itself on its citizens and threatening its neighbors. So, that's the answer. That's probably longer than the original question as posed by the desperately religious deserves, but I would just also point out that it's come to something when they say, these admirers of gentle Jesus, meek and mild, and the Prophet Muhammad, and all the other wonderful religious figures they cite. Well, at least we're not Nazis or Stalinists. One would want to be able to say, I think, better for oneself than that. If that's how they want it, this is the argument that they're going to be in, and those are the answers that they won't be able to get past.
And if you could do one thing to make our society more rational, aside from buying and reading your books, what would it be?
Well, it would have to start, I think, with education. No, wait a minute. I don't want to say that, because that sounds too boring, doesn't it? It sounds like some candidate in Iowa. There isn't one thing. There isn't one thing. If there was, we'd know what it was by now.
Fair enough.
It's not what we think, it's how we think that matters. And so there would be no one policy change that would be instituted or measure that one could take. It's a matter really, as I was just saying, about credulity and stability of opposing it in all its forms. And that means we're engaged along a very wide cultural front, which is going to require all our intelligence and all our humour, all our right and satirical capacity, as well as all our intellectual and reflective abilities as well.
Christopher Hitchens, the ever eloquent and ever thought-provoking, widely acclaimed journalist and author. Thank you so much for having us, and safe and happy travels.
Bless you.
Thanks so much.
My son.